Hello, welcome back to my channel. So today we are doing a July wrap up. I'm excited that July is over in a way because that just means fall is getting closer. And the older I get, the more I look forward to fall. I live in the desert, so I live in a really hot place. And after a month or two of over 100 degrees every day and not being able to go outside unless you're going in the pool, I'm like over it. I am ready for the fall to come. I'm ready to get cozy and stop sweating every second. So we're getting there. It's still only August now. Let's do a July wrap up. I read so many different things. This is probably my most chaotic month of reading. I went to such extreme ends of the spectrum with these books. So bear with me. I did have a good successful reading month in terms of quantity and pretty good in quality too. It wasn't my worst month. So yeah, let's get started. So the first book I read this month was The Friday Afternoon Club, a family memoir by Griffin Dunne. This was a book that was really highly anticipated for me. It was a new release and I ended up reading this on Kindle. I borrowed it from the library and I actually really enjoyed this one. I thought it was exactly kind of what I expected from what the summary and the synopsis of the book was. So basically, Griffin Dunne is an actor in Hollywood. You probably recognize his face and probably have seen him in a few things. You might not know him by name. And he had a very famous Hollywood family, tons of Hollywood friends growing up. He grew up basically in Hollywood. So it is very Nepo baby themed throughout, but very fun to kind of hear how somebody would grow up in those circumstances. He talked about how he was best friends with Carrie Fisher before she got big during Star Wars and the process of her shooting that and him and her kind of always kind of reconnecting and being really good friends throughout their lives. And then he talked about how his aunt was Joan Didion and the family dynamics of his parents and Didion and her husband. And it was just so interesting. I really liked it. There was tons of name drops, but I think when you go into this book, you expect that and you want that. So if you don't really like that kind of thing, you're probably not reading this book to start out with. And it was also really fun just to see how chaotic people lived and some of the anecdotes and the stories he told about his upbringing and how he grew up and the trouble he got into. You really wonder how people survived, I guess, like just without the internet, without, I guess, more hands-on supervision of younger people in that day. It just blows my mind how people live like that and the crazy things they did at such young ages. But it was really fun to read about. And a big part of this book was following the case of Griffin Dunne's sister, who was brutally murdered by an ex-boyfriend. And this was pretty famous, I think, during the time, this trial. And it's him kind of reliving it and giving us behind the scenes of how his family dealt with that, going to court every day, hearing the verdict, and kind of the aftermath of that, and how his family tried to move on and how they all processed their grief in different ways. So it was really poignant in those moments, and I really enjoyed seeing that other side of it. And just overall, I learned a lot about not only Griffin Dunne, but the actors and the people around him, and I really enjoyed it. And I ended up giving the book 5 stars, and I might actually end up picking up a copy of it when it does go into paperback down the line, because I did really like it and I would like to revisit it. The next book I read this month was Empire of Storms. I was back on my Throne of Glass journey. If you watched my June wrap up, I didn't get a Throne of Glass book in that month because I was traveling, and my goal this year has been to read one book from this series every month to kind of make sure and hold myself accountable to finishing this series by this year end. So June was kind of a fail, but I got back on it in July and I read the next book, Empire of Storms. I believe this one is this is number 5. So I really enjoyed this one. Again, it's another really big book. I feel like there was a lot that happened in this book. And as I've mentioned before, I'm kind of one of those people that less is more sometimes, especially in fantasy and especially in series. I think as they kind of go on, the books get bigger and bigger, and the author gets more and more ideas and just tries to pack a ton into these books and a lot of different action points, which I think in general, I think her audience really loves. For me personally, I feel like she could shorten these books a little bit and cut out some loose threads or some extra that I don't really think is absolutely necessary to this plot. But overall, I did enjoy this book. I really enjoyed Selena's or Aylin's journey in this book because I felt like she was really growing as a person. The last few books, I sometimes felt like she was really getting stuck in the grittiness of, oh, why me? Oh, everybody in my life hurts. Oh, like very woe is me type hero. And in this one, I felt like she was really putting her money where her mouth is and really sacrificing herself. And there was a lot of really cool reveals that she did to kind of put her plan into action. And I really enjoyed reading those because I felt like I said before, she was kind of stumbling into her own heroism. And in this one, I feel like she really took the reins and really had a plan in mind and was kind of following through with that. So I really did enjoy that part of this book. Before I go any further, if you're reading this book or you're planning on reading this book, I'm not going to throw any major spoilers into my synopsis, but there may be some stuff in here that you may not want to hear. So I would just fast forward through this. But to continue, the one thing that was kind of annoying was a lot of the characters were pairing off very conveniently, romantically, and I just felt like it was so convenient and a little bit, I don't know, it was just kind of uh, annoying, or it just served it too well, where I was like, that's just kind of happening too nicely. And everybody in this book is so impossibly beautiful and everybody is so attractive. And then everybody pairs off into their beautiful, attractive couple. And for me, I get that a lot of people love that. And there's more romantic couples for people to love in these books. But I'm just not, I guess, the audience for that. And I feel like it's a little too convenient to the plot. And I don't need as much of that as it's giving, but that's been kind of one of my things throughout this whole series. So, anyways, I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I think this one is one of my more favorite ones so far, and I'm excited for the last two of the series. And the last two are just as big and beefy, but we are coming to a conclusion, so I'm excited to see how everything kind of wraps up. The next book I read this month was Men We Reaped by Jesmyn Ward. This has been on my list to read for quite a while, and I'm so glad I finally picked up and got to it. I've really been in, as you can see, my memoir phase right now. I'm really enjoying all the memoirs that I've been kind of prioritizing and reading. I tend to really love a memoir because and I feel like I resonate more with real true stories in nonfiction, and I feel like they emotionally impact me more. This one, I hadn't read any of Jesmyn Ward's writing before, but I knew she was brilliant, and I was so excited to get to this one. It is beautiful. It basically tells a story of Jesmyn and growing up, and basically in her, I think it was like late teens, early 20s, 5 men in her life, family and friends, end up passing away either by suicide, murder, accident, and she kind of weaves them together and basically tells a tale of how society has kind of left these men to face extraordinary circumstances and how the odds are against them since birth, and that our society and culture have really not made these men have anything really to hope for, since they are going against so many great odds just to live. And I really loved this book. It really touched me. I think I got exactly what I was expecting out of it, and I think it's a really important read since it is so relatable, obviously, to our current culture and the history of our country. So it was really, really good. I ended up giving this one 5 stars. And I'm super excited to read more of Jesmyn Ward. I know she has like 3 or 4 other books, so I'm excited to get to those as well. The next book I picked up this month was The Fox Maidens by Robin Ha. I read this artists and writers graphic novel, An American, what was it? An American, Almost American Girl. That was the first one I read earlier this year. And if you've been following my channel, you know that I've been trying to read and expose myself to more graphic novels this year since I don't really have a lot of experience with them. So I ended up picking this one up. It is a new release. I think it came out this year, and the artwork is so, so beautiful. I borrowed this from the library, which is why it's plastic wrapped. But the artwork is just so, so pretty. Um, the premise of it is basically Korean folklore of the fox and women that turn into the fox, and it's beyond me to try to re-explain the folklore behind this, but I did really enjoy it. I think I got a little confused at some points or found it a little I don't know what the word is. Maybe not dragging, but it felt maybe a little bit repetitive in the character's emotions and growth at some points, but it is just a graphic novel. Like, it's not a full-on novel with tons of room for that development. So I did enjoy it. I ended up giving it 4 stars. I think with graphic novels, I'm an easy rater just because I'm new to it, and if it is pretty and I enjoy while I'm reading it, then I give it a fairly high rating. So I ended up giving that one 4 stars. The next book I ended up reading this month was The 7-Year Slip. I actually picked this book up, I think, at end of last year because a lot of people were reading it and enjoying it, and I hadn't read anything from Ashley Poston. So I ended up giving this one a go. I actually enjoyed this more than I thought I would. I am not a huge romance reader. I feel like they're not a huge commitment since they are so easy to read and they're quick page turners. So I've been trying to read popular romance novels that I have seen online and to try to see, what people are really enjoying and if I'll like them. To be honest, I haven't found a ton that I really enjoy, but this one I was pleasantly surprised. I thought it was better than the last couple romances that I've read. I liked the time travel magical realism element, and I do tend to like that in books, so that already had this going for it. And I also feel like it wasn't as cringy as some of the past books that I've read. Sometimes the banter is too cringy, and then the way things kind of unfold with the romance, it just feels like it kind of icks me out. And this one didn't do that to me as much, which is always a plus. So I did like the writing, and I felt like I was really anxious to see what happened. I couldn't really predict and didn't really see the ending coming. Not that it's a big, like, twist at the end, but I was kind of following it along and I didn't really have an easily predictable ending in my head. And so I enjoyed it. I thought it was pretty good. I ended up giving it 4 stars. It is not my all-time favorite romance book, but I would definitely recommend it. And even if you don't like romance, I think there's something in here that you could enjoy. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. So that was a romance success for me. The next book I read was Know My Name by Chanel Miller, another memoir this month. I have been wanting to read this one for quite a long time, but I felt like I had to be in the right headspace for it and be ready for it since it is about the infamous sexual assault case by this author, Chanel Miller, and her perpetrator, Brock Turner. If you've heard of that, or if that name sounds familiar, you've probably heard those names. The case didn't happen too long ago. It happened in the last decade. I think it happened, I can't remember quite the years, but it was pretty popular in the news. It took place in California. I grew up in California, so maybe that's why I heard more of it. But I feel like it was pretty big national news, and it had a lot of national news coverage. So this is basically her memoir after the verdict, after things have settled, basically about the night that it happened, moving forward, and how her life was changed, how the press portrayed her, how anything she did as a woman could be turned against her. And it really resonated. I think if you're a woman, I think you can get a lot out of it because you can really see yourself in a lot of her decisions and a lot of her thinking, because I think all women go through that process, and it was even escalated more going through a trial and having this caricature of herself being portrayed out there that wasn't even true. And then I think as a man, I think it's a really valuable read as well, because you can see the thinking and the way that women have to think and act and portray themselves just to try to come out equal. And a lot of times that's not the case. So I felt like it was a very powerful memoir, and I highly, highly recommend. She's a brilliant writer. There was so many lines in it that just broke my heart, and I gave that one 5 stars. It's definitely one I will think back on and remember things about. There was something really, really sweet that I remember reading that I still think about, and it almost brings me to tears. There was this quote in the book. So there was actually a quote in the book that I always, when I do my reading journal, I will put, my rating and the title and all that. And then I usually include a quote from the book that stood out to me or kind of felt like it really resonated. So this is a quote from the book about her talking to her mom when she was in her lowest and not seeing a lot of hope and not seeing how she would be able to ever live a normal life or get herself out of the place that the assault and the case took her. She just writes it so brilliantly. She goes, "When I listened to her, I understood. You have to hold out to see how your life unfolds, because it is most likely beyond what you can imagine. It is not a question of if you will survive this, but what beautiful things await you when you do." I had to believe her because she was living proof. Then she said, "Good and bad things come from the universe holding hands. Wait for the good to come." So I just thought that that was just so eloquently put about how life is both bad and good. And just because it's really bad right now, you have to hold out and wait for that good, and it makes it worth it. And that those two things kind of make life. And she kind of reflected on her mom's past and how her mom got to where she was. And then basically her going to her mom and needing that comfort, and her mom saying that really beautifully. And then at the very end, um, after she kind of went through everything and they got the verdict, and the perpetrator was found guilty, and she was kind of moving on in her life, and became such a stronger person because of it. Unfortunately, her mom said, "You are mommy's dream." And so I think that that is just, I don't know why, I think that really hits me home, because it's like, you as a parent, and because I have a daughter, maybe that's why it resonated more with me. You just want your kids to be happy, and you want your kids to feel safe in who they are and to be able to live their life. And our kids are our dream, right? So that quote just really hit me really hard, and whenever I think of it, I always get all choked up, because it is such a beautiful quote, and it's such a beautiful thing to say to your child. So anyways, I ended up giving Know My Name 5 stars. I loved that book, and I definitely have to get a copy of it. I think it just says so much. And like I said, if you're a man or a woman, or if you have a young son or a young daughter, I think it's important. I think this story is very important. Next book. As you can see, I went all over the gamut this month. I ended up reading Longbourn by Joe Baker. After Know My Name, I needed something a little bit more lighthearted and not as emotionally devastating. So I picked up Longbourn. This is a book that was on my end of year TBR. It was a book that I was like, I have to read this year and finish. So I'm really glad that I got to it. This is basically Pride and Prejudice from the perspective of the servants in the Bennet home. So instead of following Darcy and Elizabeth Bennet and her family, this follows the servants of the Bennet home, and basically what their lives are like and the dramas that are going on behind the scenes. I enjoyed this book, but I felt like the author could have done more, if you know what I mean. Like, because this was supposed to be a behind the scenes drama take, I kind of wanted there to be more going on. I understood the story, and I understood you could only get so much going on, especially during those days and that type of living. But I wish there would have been a little bit more going on. I did enjoy it. I did think it was really interesting seeing it from this perspective. I hadn't ever really thought of that. And I also really liked the parallel between Sarah, who is the main servant that you follow in this, and her love interest, James, and how Sarah and James and their personalities and their dynamic kind of mimic and parallel Elizabeth and Darcy's. So it's kind of fun to see that. It's kind of fun to see the similarities there. And overall, I enjoyed this book. I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then the big book of this month, The Book of Elsewhere by Keanu Reeves and China Miéville. I'm not quite sure how to pronounce his name. China is a very famous sci-fi writer, and obviously everybody knows Keanu Reeves. I was really, really excited to pick this up because I am such a huge Keanu Reeves fan, and I really liked the idea and the premise of this book from what I read. There wasn't a ton out there of what this was going to be about, so I kind of went in with very little idea. And I went in knowing that it wasn't getting a lot of strong, favorable reviews. So I had an idea that going in that this wasn't commercially popular in the sense that a lot of people were gonna love it. I think a lot of people were probably gonna come away with it being kind of mid or unfavorable just because people probably went in with high hopes knowing that Keanu's name was attached. I'll say I was surprised that I did enjoy it, but also I didn't love it. So I think I kind of fell in that audience of kind of mid. Basically, this book follows Keanu Reeves' comic book character, Inut or B, and it's so hard to explain. Basically, it's this immortal character that has lived like 80,000 years and cannot die. And anytime he is killed, he comes back and is reborn in this like weird little egg thing. And sometimes he's reborn in the same place he died. Sometimes he's reborn in a totally different part of the world. And in this book, he is basically the center of this off books agency, secret agency, where they're trying to research him and figure out why he is like that and how possibly they can use that to their advantage. And he knowingly is part of this. And he has said, you know, throughout this book that like, you're not the first group of people that have tried to study me and use me, and you won't be the last. And he is constantly confronted by this like wild boar pig character with these tusks, which is kind of what this cover is. And this pig has kind of found him and in different points of history and in different points of his life, and kind of found him in different parts of the world. And he doesn't know why this pig follows him and finds him and what the meaning of that is. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting premise. And so basically you're following him, following this research group and trying to figure out why he is the way he is. And ultimately, the main character wants to find his morality so that he can live his life and die when that time comes, because he is tired of just having a never-ending living existence and with no meaning. The critiques I had about this book, which I think is pretty common across the board, is it is overwritten. There's so much in this book where I'm like, what did they just say? Why are they using like 5 words in that sentence that I've never heard before? It's almost like they pulled out a dictionary and tried to pull out words that you've never heard before to describe things. And it was really, really hard to follow at some points, I will be honest. The more you read, the more you kind of just get into it and you kind of just accept it. But there is time jumps, there's different characters, there's points where you're following the main story, and then you go back in time and you follow a different character, and their perspective is like a chapter and it's in like a different font, and then you go back to the main story, and then you jump back into history of a different character, or you know, one of the characters from the main story or one of their ancestors. So it is very confusing sometimes. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Jeff Vandermeer's writing, where sometimes the writing is very passive and it relies on the reader to kind of fill in the gaps, and it can be kind of hard. And I think it definitely takes a more sophisticated reader to kind of grasp this and kind of push through. I can see a lot of people DNFing this in the first 50, 20, even 25 pages just because of that. And like Vandermeer, I feel like the writing is, you have this tone of something is unfolding and you're missing something. And there's this mystery about a life or this character, and you don't have the full picture. And that is a big theme in this book and a big part of the story. And you just feel like there's something just quite out of your reach of your understanding. And even when you finish this book, I feel like maybe you don't feel like you understand fully, or maybe that was just me, but I finished the book and I didn't know if I understood the ending fully, if that makes sense. And then the other thing that I had an issue with was I didn't feel like there was a lot of emotional depth within these characters. Even the main character, I feel like we just kind of scratched the surface, and then all of the surrounding support characters, I didn't feel like I really knew them, and they kind of fell flat for me. Overall, I actually did enjoy it the more I read it, and I think because I knew Keanu Reeves wrote it, it did push me to read through and continue. I'm not sure if I would have pushed through as quickly as I did if it had been some unknown author, if I'm being completely honest. Okay, my camera kind of cut out on me because it got overheated. Like I said, with this book, not sure I would have pushed through and really given it as much of a chance as I did if I didn't know the author. And I'm glad I did push through because I do think that you were kind of rewarded a little bit at the end and were kind of given more answers. And there was some reveals, which I thought were clever, that I didn't see coming. But I also didn't know what to expect because as you're reading this, you're just kind of like, what's going on? Where is this going? What's the solution? You know, you don't really see where the ending is going to take you. So overall, I thought it was okay. I enjoyed it enough. Will I say that I'll recommend this to a lot of people? Probably not. I think it's overwritten. I think it's a very, very distinct person and reader that is going to enjoy this enough to take something from it. And I think if you're a big sci-fi reader, you have probably read other things that have similar ideas that are more entertaining and maybe more understandable. So like I said, I'm glad I read this book. It was one of my really big anticipated reads. I always want to support Keanu, and it did introduce me to the main character, which will kind of bring me into one of my other reads this month. So overall, I ended up giving this one 3 stars. I think it's a very specific reader, but I did find it entertaining enough as I pushed through. And at the end, I'm glad I read it. So the next book I read, going from the Book of Elsewhere, I read Number the Stars. And this is, I think, a middle grade or children's chapter book. I'm not quite sure how it's categorized. I kind of had this idea to read the Newbery Honors, I think it's Newbery Honors list of winners from the year I was born to present time. When I was younger, I used to always kind of go for the books that had that Newbery award sticker on the cover because I always ended up enjoying those books quite a bit. And so I think I saw like a poster or something in the children's section when I was at the library with my daughter, and it had the winner of every year since it started. And I was like, well, wouldn't it be kind of fun to revisit a lot of those stories? They're really easy reads and go from my birth year to present time and kind of see what the writing was that year and what won and what messages they were kind of wanting to share with the audience, the children of that year. So I picked up Number the Stars, which was the 1990 winner, which was the year I was born, and I enjoyed it. I think going into it, I was expecting a lot more because I think as a kid, when I'm reading this book, they feel like really big stories and they feel more grand. And then when you read them as an adult, they seem like such a small part of the story and not as grand as what you're used to reading because obviously your reading's taste, you mature, you want more out of writing, you get more out of, adult fiction versus kids fiction. So I don't know what I was thinking going into it. I think I was expecting a grander story, but it is just more of a snippet of a story. They're basically following this Danish family during the beginnings of the Holocaust when their country was taken over by German soldiers. And she was not Jewish, but her best friend's family is Jewish, and basically how her family tries to help her best friend's family get out of Denmark and get to Sweden where they aren't occupied and Jews aren't being taken from their homes. So it was a really important story, I think, to tell kids of that age. And I think it's a good little snippet where it's not too graphic and it kind of gives them an idea of what was going on in that point of history without going too far for that age. So I did enjoy it. I think I ended up giving it like 3 stars, which it feels weird rating a children's book because I think if I had read it for the age group that it is written for, I would have rated it much higher. But since I am kind of rereading or reading it as an adult, I am reading it with that lens. So I'm probably not going to be as impressed by it since I've read so much since then. I'm not the age group. So my rating is really just a wash. But I did enjoy it, and I would like to keep reading more books from that list and from my childhood, just as a kind of a nostalgia thing. And also, I kind of want to read them so that when my daughter maybe is of that age, I can recommend them if it really kind of stands out to me. Going from children's book, I ended up reading The Midnight Library by Matt Haig. This was very, very popular, I feel like in 2020, 2021, and I never read it. And I was like, I need to read this book just to know why. It is one of those books where you go on their Goodreads and it has so many ratings and so many reviews. And in general, they're pretty good ratings. I'm pretty sure this was really loved at the time. And I put this on my end of the year TBR because I was like, it's now or never. I'm going to either read this book this year or I'm never going to read it. So finally read it. It was a very, very easy read, much easier than I expected just because the chapters are like a couple pages long. And it is very easy to read. It's not dense. It's a page turner, and it's not super long. So with the short chapters, the language, and the page count, it is a really quick read. I think I read this within like 24 hours or maybe even 48 hours. Overall, I thought it was fine. I wasn't as wowed as from what I anticipated since so many people love this. I thought it was a lot simpler and less sophisticated than I had expected. Just because of all the love that it got, I thought it was going to do more. To me, it was just kind of like another story similar to A Christmas Carol or It's a Wonderful Life, where someone is in their lowest point and them having this magical ability to see all the different lives they could have lived and what their decisions and what their presence does to affect other people as well. So it's basically about a girl. She's really down in the dumps. She is so down in the dumps that she wants to kill herself. And before she does do that, when she's in kind of this magical in between after she's tried to kill herself, it basically takes her to the Midnight Library. And there you can pull all the books of all the different decisions that you could have made and all the different alternate universes that you could have lived. And basically, she goes and lives those different lives and kind of sees what different decisions could have led her to different things. I felt it was a little cliche, a little oversimplified. And I don't know if the depression that she had really showed the emotional gravity of the situation, because at the end, that depression about her life is really quickly resolved. And if she was so low where she was willing to herself, then I don't know if it would have wrapped up so easily, but it did. And in this book, so it was fine. It was enjoyable. I think I gave it 3 stars. Wasn't super impressed by it. I think this is one I could have passed on and never read, but at least I did, and I know what's up. I read How to Stop Time by this same author last year, and I had kind of the same response to that book. So maybe Matt Haig just isn't for me. I think he writes really commercially popular books. I'm not maybe the reader for this, so I may not be reading any more Matt Haig. But anyways, I ended up giving it 3 stars. And then the last thing I read this month, because coming off of the book of Elsewhere, I wanted to read Keanu Reeves' comic book series or graphic novel series that the main character in the book of Elsewhere is based off of. So I picked up Brzrkr Bloodlines. I think this is a compilation of a couple comics that kind of are like a prequel to his comic series. So I actually ended up reserving the other comic series at my library that I have to go pick up. But I read this one. It's really, really short. The art is really, really cool. It's pretty graphic. So that's why I'm like only showing certain. It's pretty graphic in the sense of like gore and spiciness. I ended up enjoying it. It was really quick read. I mean, this would probably take you 30 minutes to read. It was really easy, but I really enjoyed the art. I thought the story was fine. Like I said earlier, I am not a great reviewer of comics / graphic novels because I don't have a ton of experience with them. So I'm basically rating it a 4 most times if I enjoyed reading it and I thought the art was good. I think I would rate it a 5 if I thought that the story was really blew my mind and the art was beautiful. And then 3 is kind of like not really liking it, I guess. I guess that's how I'm rating graphic novels and comics. But like I said, I enjoyed it enough where I'm picking up the rest of the series just to read what happens. And I thought the art was really fun to kind of look at, and I liked kind of getting more background into this character that was the main character of the Book of Elsewhere. So I ended up reading 11 books this month, and I was all over the spectrum. I read a children's chapter book, fantasy, sci-fi, romance, memoirs, comic books, graphic novel. I think I was really going for it this month and really trying a lot of different things. And I also, because I read so many memoirs, I think I was looking for something lighthearted to kind of bookend each of those memoirs. So I was picking random lighthearted books to follow those so that I wasn't reading heavy, emotionally draining books after heavy, emotionally draining books. So overall, I had a really good reading month. I think that I read the most I've read in a long time, and also I felt like there was a lot of quality there. I really got to a lot of those that I had been kind of had on the back burner and had on my shelf that I wanted to get to. So I'm glad that I finally did, and I was definitely rewarded by them. But yeah, thank you so much again for watching. I hope you had a successful reading month as well, and I will see you on my next video. Bye!